Welcome. How about that show, huh? Pretty remarkable. So this is sort of like a pop-up version of this new series that we're doing called How I Got Over, which is in large part inspired by a Toni Morrison quote that I kind of live by, which is, "We die, and that may be the meaning of life, but we do language, and that may be the measure of our lives." And so using that as a guideline, I want to sort of talk with interesting people like you all doing very creative stuff, talking about the ways in which we talk, don't talk, should talk about race and how it intersects with our everyday lives. And so I sort of do it in 3 different segments. The first is called What's Going On, and that's kind of looking at the headlines of the news and how we talk about the headlines in the news. So, of course, the big story this week is Donald Trump as a sexual predator. Donald Trump, who probably doesn't bear stating, or need stating, but will say is a pronounced anti-Muslim, xenophobic, racist, misogynist. Memorably, notably, at the Democratic Convention, implied that Muslim women are not allowed to speak. But what I thought was really important and interesting, and what I wanted to ask you all, is that this latest, the video, of him talking about women in such a lewd way, and now 9 women have come forward with accusations of sexual assault. I wondered how that news, that information resonates in with you and your community, and in a faith where there are such specific ideas and assumptions and stereotypes about women. Well, how do you talk about it with your friends, with your peers, with your colleagues? Maha, do you want to start?
Sure. There's a couple of parts to that question. So I think I'm just going to talk about the reaction to Donald Trump's comments on women this week, since the last debate. Honestly, it's not surprising from where I stand as a Muslim woman, and even when the stuff with the first debate came up with a family of a fallen war veteran was attacked, was the first time anyone paid attention to the anti-Muslim rhetoric, and that is what's really troubling to me. None of this is surprising because if you've been listening for it, it's been there the whole time. But it seems to be like we pick and choose these very specific moments. Anti-Muslim sentiment doesn't seem to matter until it's a veteran. Anti-women sentiments don't seem to matter until he's actually having people step up with accusers. So
along those lines, he's been assaulting women throughout his life and career, but people didn't really go after him until it was white women that he was assaulting.
Exactly.
Right? And then Michelle Obama had this incredibly moving speech this week where she sort of put a nuance to it, which is this is what all women have experienced, which I thought was really crucial and necessary. But I wonder, do you talk to your friends in a way about what he is saying that is particular or germane or specific to your community?
I think I did when it was still new. I think I've tuned out of this election a little while ago because, again, like I said, it's not surprising to me anymore. I've said this a few different times, but I don't find what he says or his personality to be surprising. What I find, because there's been racists in this country as long as this country has existed, what I really find really disheartening is the massive support that he has garnered through rhetoric like this and the acceptability of using language like he has used. And so, to me, when these incidents come up and everyone's all of a sudden shocked that he doesn't treat women well, my surprise is more about what politics have you been following that this is somehow news to you?
So you're not shocked?
I'm absolutely not
Amir,
shocked.
how do you talk with your peers, your colleagues, your family?
When I was a kid, there was this movie that I remember watching. It was called Not Without My Father. I don't know if anybody saw this movie. What was that lady's name? Sally Fields. And it's this terrible movie where where there's, my aunt used to go and warn my mother, watch this movie before she married my father. So I would watch this movie, and this image of it's a Persian man, but Middle Eastern men and Muslim men are atrocious and are vile, and they hate women, and be careful, don't get married to them because they'll kidnap your kids and lock you up in some dungeon in Iran. But what's funny about this is that, and I hear this from liberals and conservatives, and the women and the plight of women in the Middle East is terrible, it's horrible, how do they handle it? And then you got somebody like Roger Ailes and Fox News and all the horrible things he was doing and the things that Donald Trump has said, and I'm sure he has done. It shows me that America isn't this enlightened feminist society that it likes to portray itself to the rest of the world. We got a lot of nasty issues going on here. So to go point your finger to the Middle East and say how terrible they are in terms of women rights, women rights here is it's bad. It's it's not the same, but it's the same. It's still it's different, but it's the same, and that's what's happening. So this to me the curtain has been lifted on our little secret here that we've been trying to tell the rest of the world how to live, and we have all these issues against women in this country. So I think that's very interesting.
But sort of beyond that kind of lifting the veil and exposing and revealing, what kind of society we are, which I think we're constantly doing, but very poignantly with this election, in conversation, if you are with your best friend or your colleague or whatever, we just read about this thing with Donald Trump, and how does it resonate specifically for you and your community?
He's a product of this country, and the things he said and the things his viewpoint and how he treats women, and I grew up in Jackson Heights, and it's a thing for guys to stand on the corner and whistle and holler at women walking by, and that's something it's a threat in our country. So to go and say, oh, how dare Donald Trump say these things? He's saying what I hear all the time, every day, on every street corner, men talking about women and in conversation how they talk about women. So it's not to excuse Donald Trump for saying what he's saying, and it's what he said is horrible, but this is something that's in our society that we have to not project it out on Donald Trump and telling him how terribly, but we have to look at our society and how we view women and how we treat women, how we talk about women, and how we can change that collectively, because Donald Trump will not win this election, but we're still going to have these problems in our society, and how do we deal with it?
But say I'm your sister.
Yes.
We're sitting on the couch and we're watching Donald Trump, and we're watching that Democratic convention speech, and he says what he says, and I say, well, Amir, I'm a woman and he's making these assumptions. What do you say to me?
I say what I tell my sister about men, and I have a sister, she's 16 years old, and I always tell her, never let a man make you feel that you're any less than them, put you in this box, no matter how they talk about. I know she goes to New York City public high school, and I know how boys are. And I tell her that in spite of all that, never have that sense that you have to fit a certain gender role, or you have to do a certain thing, or you have to suppress any form of individuality you have, but you have to keep going. People talk like that, and it's disgusting, and it's something that's in our society that we have to change. But in terms of my sister, I tell her, keep going, keep doing. Don't ever sell yourself short for anybody. And no matter how they talk about you, just keep doing it. And who cares if they're talking about you? I always tell her you're doing something right. So.
Sarah, what is the conversation like in your community, with your peers, with your family?
So I'm Sarah Zatz. I'm the associate director of Ping Chong Company, one of
the
co-writers.
An
of
introduction
the show.
for you. I'm
so
sorry.
For those of you who are wondering who this other person is on stage that wasn't telling her story,
sorry about that.
And I'm not Muslim, but I think going back to your original question, I think one of the key points for me in the recent conversations of this week is this idea of why now, why these women, and given everything, every racist, xenophobic, and sexist thing that Donald Trump has said until now, why is it suddenly white women that need to be protected, and why is it suddenly, we're all clutching our pearls because this is lewd talk? And here's a man who publicly took out an ad against the Central Park Five, who were exonerated, and who has shifted blame and shifted racist attention to people of color and implicated them, people who are more likely to be accused of crimes. And so I feel like this conversation has really brought out the way in which sort of white privilege can dominate that conversation when it's suddenly, protecting the white women, as opposed to recognizing that sexual assault is something that, 1 in 4 women experience and 1 in 6 men experience growing up. So I feel like for me, that's the question, is sort of why does it take this moment to suddenly find that his actions and words are abhorrent when they've been very visible in public until now?
So I'm at your house at a dinner party, and you said just what you said and talked about white privilege. And I say what? What white privilege? What the hell is that?
Do you want me to define white privilege?
Yes. Yes, I do.
White privilege would be, for me, recognizing that I, as a white woman in the society, may be accorded certain benefits and the ability to be neutral, the ability to be upheld as someone who needs to be maybe protected, maybe honored or validated in ways that my story may be out in the media and represented in ways that maybe Maha's story doesn't get to be told, and hopefully why this project is important, to have people telling their own stories. But in terms of whose story gets represented, whose story gets upheld, whose story gets the attention, and since we were talking about sexual assault in particular, I think it's usually the story of the pretty white girl, as opposed to how sexual assault is pervasive across all backgrounds. But where does the story, who gets to tell the story?
Okay. And how does that interface with the work that you do and have done throughout, your career, which is widely global and deals a lot with people of color?
So Ping Chong Company has created works like Beyond Sacred for 25 years, where we work with and among community members to bring stories to the stage, not to give voice to people, because people already have their own voices. People are already empowered, but to work collaboratively to create opportunities for these stories that may not be told in mainstream media or in mainstream theater.
I just want to stop you just for a second, because that is such an important distinction, what you just said. Not to give voice to people because they already have voices. Not to empower because they already have power. That's so, so critical. And that sort of speaks to the kind of, underprivileged communities, and the what's the favorite term, which is marginalized communities. I mean, these words that we use for human beings who are living really beautifully productive, wonderful lives. So I just want to highlight that, but go ahead and continue.
Thank you. So that is the kind of work that this project Beyond Sacred is grounded in, and the idea of having the cast members tell their own stories on stage as opposed to having their stories interpreted by actors, to me is the key of this project. So it's a collaborative project. We work with folks to do the interview process. The scripting is created by the artists of Ping Chong Company, but the cast members have final say and final approval, and we went back and forth quite a bit, nuancing the language, and Maha and I worked really closely to make sure that the words that she was saying on stage felt authentic and in her own voice. And so although Ping Chong Company is credited as the writers of the show, it's listed as in collaboration with the performers. And so to me, that's the essence of this project, is again, not giving voice, but creating the platform for voices to be heard, and working in a structure so that the actual stories that are being told by the people themselves.
And Maha, where would you say the intersection of Muslim identity and race is?
Where?
Yeah,
like
or what?
Yeah,
no. Geographically located.
Well, I mean, I sort of touched on this in the play as well, but it's really hard for me to separate any of these things. I can't separate, one of my personalities from the rest of them. Both the color of my skin and my faith have informed every single decision and every single move that I've made in my entire life. So I don't think it can be pinpointed in that way. And when we talk about sort of Muslim societies, these are societies that evolved with like Quranic literature and certain beliefs, and it's evolved in very, very different ways. And so for me, being like a Pakistani American Muslim who grew up in the Middle East and like moving back and forth between the US and the Middle East, race has played like a really crazy role in my life.
Right.
Where when I was in the Middle East, and again, I touch upon this in the play, South Asians are looked down upon largely in the Middle East because of like sort of the wealth discrepancy between the Gulf states and the South Asian states. And so my father's a chemical engineer. We did fine for ourselves, but like because I was South Asian, I was seen as lower class by many people who were there. And my Americanness, which as a kid I tried to capitalize on, was my like ticket to being popular, or my accent. You know, when I come to America, people are like, "But where are you really from?" Right? So then my Americanness is actually denied me. And so these things are all an inherent part of my identity. And yet, wherever I go, something is being denied me, and I have to somehow justify my presence or justify who I am.
Right. But when you think about race in America, what do you think about?
Problems.
Problems.
Yeah, I mean, I moved back to the United States at a really interesting time. I moved back in the year 2000. So I moved to a pretty white suburb on Long Island as a brown Muslim with a nose ring from the Middle East. People didn't understand what the Middle East was. They thought it was near Chicago somewhere. You know, like no one had any idea who I was or where I was from or why, you know, like there was a real serious ignorance about Islam in the Middle East. And 1 year later, after September 11th, everyone already knew everything they needed to know about me.
Right.
Right. Like all of a sudden, everyone else was an expert on Islam, and I didn't need to be asked about my faith or anything like that. And all of a sudden, it becomes the end-all, be-all of who you are in this country. And so I think the race dynamics shifted really. I mean, obviously, the race dynamics of like South Asians or Muslim seeming individuals, and this includes South Asians of non-Muslim backgrounds, our entire like dynamic in this country really shift after 9/11. And movements that were not typically or historically identified with by South Asian communities, like the civil rights movement, all of a sudden became really relevant and interesting. It's all of a sudden we were surveilled, we were being watched, and none of these issues mattered as much to us before that. And so to me, like, the shift also means like there's a little bit more, hopefully, and this is the only way we're ever going to move forward, is like a little bit of solidarity between movements of different minority groups that honestly, like I would say like a lot of South Asian Muslims were really guilty of being apathetic towards before 9/11 because it didn't affect them.
Right. Amir, what do you think of when you think about race in America and how it pertains to you?
You asked about race and how race and religion, I guess Islam, intersects. You could be white and Muslim, so I don't. There's a lot of misconceptions I think we have, where the idea that we categorize Muslims as one whole group, where it's a very diverse group. It's as diverse as Christianity is. You know, you can't point a Christian out of a crowd, but everybody thinks they could point a Muslim out of a crowd. But it's a very diverse group of people. This whole room can have a mass conversion right now if you wanted to, and you'll all be Muslim. So, and it's very easy. There's no baptism or anything. 1, 2, 3. You say 3 words, you're a Muslim. But race in this country is something so different and so complex that I feel gets muddled down with all these other things. And black people have a unique situation in the United States of America that no other group, even other immigrant groups, cannot even imagine. You know, African Americans in this country were enslaved for 400 years, and they've never been rectified. You know, Jim Crow laws were directed towards African Americans, and although other groups have been affected by that, racism against black people is the underlying foundation of the United States of America, right? So we're all, whatever backlash any other group gets because of this country, because of the white power capitalist structure of this country, is because we've never took care of that, the original sin of the United States, which is black enslavement. And we have to recognize that. And the civil rights movement did amazing things for everyone else. They gave all these other opportunities for all these other groups to be able to have what we have now. We see these things slowly being rolled back. I feel like I'm in a dentist with this thing. Anyway, we're slowly being rolled back. It's being rolled back, and how can we, an Arab Rican like myself, contribute to the Black Lives Matter movement? Because if Black Lives matter, all lives will matter. But until Black lives start to matter, no lives will be matter of any other minority of this country. So we have to have solidarity with that movement. We have to be a part of it, and that's how I feel about that.
Great answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just as a point, though, I think the original sin might have been the massacre of the Native.
Yes, massacre of the Indians.
Right. I mean, you can certainly the original sins.
I'm so
for
sorry.
Sure. But I think that Amir brings up a really important point, which is, I often get asked, and this series is really, I think, a little bit broader. But when I write about whatever racism, I do feel like the kind of the homepage, the central. The through line, it started with systemic racism started with the power dynamic between blacks and whites. A massacre is not a power dynamic, it's just killing folk, right? The slavery was a real infrastructure that launched what became America and what we live now. So I have two other segments, but it feels like we've talked a little bit about the work which is really enlightening and also very kind of, it's right in my wheelhouse, the kind of thing that I love, which is just sort of taking it to a very basic level of talking to people, talking about your own experience. Is there something for you, Maha, that you haven't said in terms of doing this project that is especially critical for people to know about it?
There's many things, I think. I think Sarah sort of touched on it a little bit. But what I think is the most important thing that I hope will be taken away from this project is that you hear about Muslims all the time, but you really never hear about Muslims from Muslims, and you definitely don't hear about it in our own first-person voices. And so I hope you take away from this is that we are sharing our personal experiences. We are not representing anybody else. And what we try to show you is 5 different lives that I'm sure that every single one of you could relate to some part of. The thing that makes me really hesitant sometimes about when we do Q&A after the show and the sort of response I get is like this duty of every Muslim to therefore go out and put out a counter narrative or defend Islam. And I want to really want to emphasize that we are volunteering to be up here and talking about ourselves. Nobody has a right to know someone's life story because we're a marginalized population, right? So and this is a way I fundamentally changed throughout the process of this show. I make myself more available in my personal life to answer questions that some people would say are dumb questions, which I don't, there's some dumb questions, but, I don't treat them that way. But that doesn't mean that every single Muslim has some sort of duty to answer all of these questions. Everyone has the right to live their lives with the amount of privacy and discretion that they want. And that to me is actually white privilege, is you don't have to answer for the rest of your people. We seem to have to do that. Ever.
Yeah. But I'd like to think that we're maybe changing that a little bit, that we are in this moment that whether it is a trend of identity politics or some kind of Gladwellian tipping point. Like there's a window of heightened receptivity to conversations about race and identity. And so, I feel like we're talking about and hearing about whiteness as a default, as an identity for the first time, really. So I do think that we have an opportunity not to say, speak for your race, but to say, check that out. It is not infallible. It is not something that we can't also deconstruct like we deconstruct Muslim identity and Black identity and Latino identity. So I'm not talking like, Pollyanna-ish kind of stuff. I'm just trying to do the work and keep going forward. Like maybe we do have a minute to talk about this.
Your mouth to Allah's ears.
Pardon?
From your mouth to Allah's ears.
Yeah, right. Amir. Is there something in particular you would like people to take away that you haven't said before?
Let me think. You see, I had a chance to think, and I still didn't think. Well, it's interesting talking about how white people don't have to explain themselves, and I do feel that sometimes, that I always have to explain or I'm expected, I don't explain, but I'm expected to explain what a Muslim is or how to be Muslim. I'm like, I don't go up to Christians and say, let me know every little detail about Jesus Christ and give me all this information. You don't hear that. And a convert of any other religion who's just joining knows more than I'll ever know. I can't explain, and it's ridiculous to have to, as if I'm proving something to you. I just tell people, if you were so interested, go get a PhD in it, and then we'll come talk. We did a show, I forget where now, where somebody said we were preaching to the choir. As every time we do the show, we're just talking to left people, or people who listen to WNYC, and it's just a specific group of people. And I challenged him. I said, what are you doing after you finish watching the show? You're just going to go back home and read the New York Times and complain? Or are you going to go out and do something? Are you going to be part of something? Are you going to challenge the narrative and help us and be a real ally and a supporter, rather than just coming to the show, feeling like you're sophisticating and going home and not being part of something? I said, what's good at preaching to the choir if the choir don't go out and go do something and get things thinking? Look, Donald Trump, you see how popular he is in this country. You see the bombing in the Middle East going on right now that created a situation for Donald Trump to rise in the first place. And what are we doing to challenge this? What are we doing to stop this, to really change the direction where our country is going? And it's up to us. So it's not just preaching to the choir. I don't mind saying this 100 million times, but as long as we don't get up and go do something, I'm going to keep doing these shows and let people know that Muslims are human beings, and we feel all the same things you feel, and we're as an American, if not more so than anybody else, and we need to really fight and shape the direction of where this country's going.
Sarah.
What's the thing that I want people to know about the show?
Yeah.
I think for me, and I'm obviously not telling my own story on stage, is this idea that there's no singular identity, that we're talking about Muslim identity in this show, but we're also talking about economic disparity. We're talking about Occupy Wall Street. We're talking about Black Lives Matter. We're talking about the intersectional identities of the people in the show. So you're not just Muslim. You can be Muslim and queer. You can be Muslim and female. You can be Muslim and white. So I think
I don't know why she pointed at me for.
I'm
what happened
acknowledging your point previously, but that this idea that people hold that it means one thing to be Muslim is a fallacy, and so I think that's something that the show sort of helps to break apart.
I think we're a little bit over, but I'm the third and final segment of the show is a Proust questionnaire with a black cast, a reboot with a black cast. The Proust questionnaire, of course, is the personality list of questions. So I'm just going to ask one question to each of you, and then we can wrap. I'm going to ask you, Maha, because you in the program you mentioned bell hooks. So who is the last black author that you read?
I was just talking about this, and I cannot pronounce her last name, but I read Americana by Chimamanda
Adichie?
Adichie. That's
I don't
right.
want to do it wrong, but yeah, that was the last black
Did you like?
author. I loved it.
Yeah, she's so good.
Yeah, she
is. Excellent. Amir? Do you want the same question or a different one?
Give me another one.
Okay, give you another one. What black historical figure resonates with you the most, and why?
Malcolm X. Not to mention he lived not so far from where I lived. So when I was a kid, there was two Muslims Muslims, growing up in the 90s as a Muslim kid, you knew every Muslim because there weren't many of us, so we always wanted to see us somewhere. So Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, those were the two that we were so proud of. And Malcolm X, just his revolutionary persona, his fight to change this society for a better place. I read his book when I was in the 6th grade, and it was like just eye-opening, and I can't explain it right now in this short little thing, but yeah, Malcolm X.
Excellent. Yeah. Sarah, do you want a different question, or?
I can take the literature question.
I was actually going to ask you the third question, which is, when was the last time you were in a social environment that was predominantly black?
In New Orleans, when we did a project on with transgender youth of color who are being criminalized by police. It was a similar format to this, and it was called Say My Name.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, guys, and thank you for your candor and your joy and your talent and for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for going easy on us.
I'd like to bring up the rest of the cast as well for one more round of applause, please. Welcome.